happening. Hello, welcome everyone. Can we see that folks are joining?
Oh, I see a hi from Australia.
Go ahead and in the chat, give a little hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be in the United States or even across the globe. I'm Danielle Triplett. I'm here from Eugene, Oregon. I'm a senior research assistant, and we're going to talk to you about work we've been doing, research related to moving away from exclusionary discipline practices in schools. And I'll let my co-hosts, co-presenters introduce themselves now. So Saki, you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you so much, Danielle. Hello, everyone. My name is Saki Malose. I work as a research assistant with the University of Oregon. Very pleased to be here today and present in front of an audience which can be joining from any part of the world. And what brings me to this work is the equity focused work that I have done previously back home in India and here as well in the United States. That's something that brings me towards this work. And I pass it on to my colleague Laurel now to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laurel. I'm excited to be here. I'm also coming from Eugene, Oregon. I'm a master's student in school psychology, and I've been working on the ISSA team for about 3 years now.
Thank you, Laurel. And I'll introduce Shasta and AJ, our school-based partners who are so busy keeping schools going and are not able to join us today. So we're going to go through their slides, but I want to recognize Shasta Quigley, who is from the Eugene School District. She's a PBIS coach and behavior coordinator there and has done a phenomenal job working with us over the past few years. We're doing research with some local districts, but really she has really helped get things going so that it's not this is something we do just for research and then it falls away, really building into the district-wide systems, creating even new roles in buildings to carry this work forward. So we'll be talking about that. And then our other partner is AJ Ruby, who is the principal of one of our local middle schools, the Arts and Technology Academy here in Eugene. And she's also, I believe, helping sub and cover all the various staffing shortages at her middle school there. So thank you. But they've been really, really critical to us refining this intervention and learning in sort of our in-school laboratories over the past years, and even stuck with us during COVID, and it's been a really great partnership. So welcome everyone, wherever you're joining us from. We're really happy to have you and hope this will be a good use of your time today. So I'm going to quickly go through our slides. Of course, this is a PBIS conference, so we've got to have positively stated expectations for all of us adults. So we're being responsible, we're being respectful, we're being safe. And there's even some notes here for presenters. So hopefully we've done all those things. Saki and I will be your sort of content presenters, and Laurel is here to help monitor the chat for us, answer questions, kind of pause us if there's things we need to clarify. So use that chat, and that's Laurel will be your go-to person on that part there. All right. And so here's some more tips about your sessions in Pathable. Looks like you all made it. So congratulations on that. I know we were texting each other, just figuring out how to do it ourselves. So we're glad to have you. Then navigating the session page. I did this morning at the keynote. I did click on the sort of that blue bar and it took me out of the keynote and I had to come back. So that happens, do that. I just found you just go back to schedule and choose the session and you can rejoin without any trouble, hopefully. In this session, we're going to be using the chat a few times. So there'll be opportunities for you to respond that way. So go for that. And then Laurel can do a little shouting out of what we see there. So we'll look forward to that. And then we're hoping to save the last 15 minutes for Q&A. And so as you're doing this, jot down questions that you have. And we'll save that last part of the session to address what questions you have and ideas, things you want to talk about with the group. Okay. Oh, and here's the one about accidentally navigating away. It happens. And so no worries. Well, come back when you can. And support is available. There's a help desk. And we have also Diane Lemaster, who's someone who works the Midwest PBIS network there in Chicago. And so she's on deck to also provide us support. So thank you, Diane, for being here for us. All right, so when working with your team, right, really this is hopefully something teams are attending. And so think about these questions, right? How does this work we're presenting compare with the priorities you've set? What team would oversee this work? I'll tell you specifically, most of the schools we've worked with is their tier 1 PBIS or some other universal team that really governs this work. We're not in the business of trying to create new teams. We're trying to use existing teams and fold this work into the way the things they're already doing. And what should we stop doing to make room for this work? I think that's a really relevant question. One of the big things we're going to sort of push you to stop doing is excluding kids from the learning environment for behavior, right? And so really thinking about those practices in your building and what we can do to serve all of our students better and treat behaviors as teachable moments the same way we handle academics when kids need more support and instruction rather than a punitive consequence. All right, and then we'll think about how you'll assess whether it's implemented well and working. All right. So here's our learning objectives for today. We're going to understand the harmful impacts of some of these practices that have been around for decades, even centuries in education, and kind of rethinking, why do we do this? This is just sort of how it's been for a long time, and we want to kind of shake that up. Now's a good opportunity. I think there's a lot of folks rethinking education, sort of redefining it, and really looking at that whole child approach. We want to learn about what we really refer to instructional supports to give students when they are removed from class, whether that's a short-term thing or for a longer-term period of time, and an emphasis on really some restorative practices to get them back to class, reconnect with that teacher, and rejoin the learning environment. And then also, as you're doing this, you'll be reflecting on sort of how you can apply your discipline policies in your school, district, or ESD in a more fair and equitable manner. All right. So in the chat, I want folks to think about what calls you to education, what's best for kids, and really think about what probably was something in our hearts. I think often that was what brought us to education. I know for me, I wanted to be a teacher since I was a very little girl and had my sister, who's 3 years younger than me, like pretty much from day one, I was her first teacher. And so what called you to education, and what do you think is best for kids? Laurel, what are folks saying out there?
I'm seeing quite a few answers: making a difference in kids' lives and in society, building relationships, fostering connections, continuing learning, thinking about creating a positive influence on children, consistency, yep, building relationships.
Oh, we've got all the best people in our session today, I can tell. That's wonderful. Yeah, these are some images of what we really think of as what's best for kids. And as we've developed this intervention and this research over the past several years, we've really turned to the literature that's out there and evidence-based practices that really that are shown to improve and sustain strong relationships, right? That often we hear that so much, that's really what school's all about. And I think with being out of buildings for some time and now coming back to them, it's really just emphasized the importance of having connections with other humans. And so that's really going to be a focus here, and something as we refine the ISSA intervention, which I'll give you more information about as we keep going. It's really at the heart of it, what's best for kids, right? So things like we see here, greeting kids at the door, having heartfelt conversations, really giving students space and acknowledging their voice, Providing time for mental health check-ins and conversations about that, I think, is really the direction we're going. All right, now, no, but Laurel, did anyone say they did it so they could get kids in trouble or like write referrals or suspend them? I'm kind of going to guess that that's usually not what we'd see, especially if folks came to a PBIS conference, right? So we're going to start now with looking at exclusionary practices. And I loved, this is a perfect tie into Dr. Jamison's keynote this morning, because she shared some of the data we see about, I think it was something like 11 million days of missed school or something like that, right? So we've looked at that similar data and seen that out of school suspensions, right, are one of the most damaging things we can do to our students. But we really look at exclusionary practices on this continuum, right? From even just an in-class timeout, maybe sitting out in the hallway, detention is still pretty common, to ISS, in-school and out-of-school suspension, all the way to expulsion. And as that loss of instructional time gets greater, so does the severity of the negative outcomes for kids, right? No surprise. And it's not even just students or the student who receives these exclusionary practices that's harmed. It really can do damage to the school environment, the community, and others as well. So what do we know, right? We know that when students are excluded or missing school for this behavior, they're missing academic instructional time, but they're also missing that social skill building opportunities. Again, something the pandemic and being sort of stuck at home and learning through Zoom or other online platforms has amplified, right? To realize that a lot of our students, one thing we're seeing in middle schools, for example, I'm hearing from a lot of the administrators out there, and I'm sure I'll see some heads nodding if I could see you, would be that some of our kids are coming in with, if they're entering middle school at 6th grade, with some 4th grade, elementary school behaviors that they didn't kind of outgrow yet. They're still doing a lot of physical fighting and inappropriate name calling because they miss that social skill building opportunity. They miss kind of that growing up together and fading out some of those things. And so we know that of course that's true. And so when we're doing that to kids individually and suspending them or having them miss school for behavior, there's a lot of detrimental outcomes there, right? And so we know that use of exclusionary discipline is linked to a lot of really harmful outcomes. Failing school, dropping out or being pushed out, using substances, incarceration, probation, and the list goes on and on. All right. We also know, like Dr. Jamison also illustrated this for us, is that who's most at risk for this? Well, it's the students who probably are already disadvantaged and disenfranchised by our educational systems. It's our students of color, it's our students with disabilities, and those students living in poverty and struggling academically. So you can see this is just a snippet of some of the research out there that really shows some of these harmful outcomes for these groups of students. So we also know that the detention, suspension, office discipline referrals, these are not like treatments. These occasionally they're necessary. Writing a referral to document behavior can be a really important part of your sort of big multi-tiered system of support in your school, and be able to look at that data and use it for decision making and improving systems is super important. But those alone don't change the behavior. Like writing a referral and giving that kid that thing or sending it home to their family is not necessarily instructional, right? So what do we want? We want instruction on appropriate behaviors. We really align this to how we teach academic content. So if a student was not reading at grade level or not understanding the math concepts you're teaching, I hope none of us would send that kid out in the hallway to think about it or give them a think sheet and say, go write down the reason you did that wrong, right? Like that would be more punishing. And so we're really taking that same approach of instruction, saying what skills are they missing? What practice do they need? What supports can we provide them to help that student be more successful? Of course, big fan of the 5-to-1 ratio for positive statements for every corrective statement that we've got to constantly as educators keep kids on the right track and remind them and prompt them, but really want to train ourselves to have as many positive acknowledgements and interactions as we can, right? So that's a huge thing that can make a big impact here. And like I said, that instructional response focused on teaching and reconnecting with their adults, right? big picture, big message here is that we can't punish skills into a kid. I'm sure you've got plenty of examples as educators out there of students who've received multiple referrals, been suspended multiple times, and we aren't seeing a change in their behavior. It's not, if that were the case, that would be amazing, right? You do it once and they come back to school and say, oh, I'm a changed person. I see the error of my ways and I'm going to be the model student now. Like, we kind of know from experience and of course research, that's not how things go. So this is what we're kind of saying what works. So what works here is having a community of practice, right? Really having teachers, educators, support staff, everyone in the building on the same page, really moving in that same direction and collaborating in ways to support one another and really move in this direction together and discuss what is going to work to solve some of these issues for kids. All right. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. And one thing that the pandemic's been a bright spot for our team has been really talking more openly about mental health. We at our project meetings, we start with kind of check-ins, mental health and otherwise, and then we end our meetings with Saki guiding us through guided meditation, which has been a wonderful thing. And so we've really, I think, practiced what we preach and trying to do some things that make mental health part of just the conversation. And so because that's been something that's really joined folks together during these times when we've been pushed apart. So we want to talk about how our state of mind affects our learning. And so we know, and we want to think about this from our students' point of view, when we're feeling stressed, right? Our brain, our amygdala is going to respond quickly when it detects a threat, right? So when that might be what that looks like in the classroom, the teacher's sort of coming up and maybe you're engaging in a power struggle, asking a student to do something they don't want to do. Well, oftentimes the student's going to go for their fight, flight, or freeze response, right? They either kind of, pick one of those. Their brain might go into that state where they're anxious, stressed, and fearful. The prefrontal cortex is not going to respond. It's going to go right to that amygdala. And so this is something that we really emphasize as we work with schools to think about this for when they're thinking about students and their unwanted behaviors, is that students aren't in a place to learn when they're in this state of mind, right? Another way to sort of look at this is really that escalation cycle. And we've all experienced trauma or unwanted events that push us from that calm to up to our peak there, and then hopefully de-escalation and recovery. But when we're working with students who've been removed from class for behavior, or working with adults who work with those students, this has been something that's really resonated, and not just for the adults, but for the students to see this and recognize, yes, I'm up here at this peak, but that doesn't go on forever. I will get to this de-escalation. But what we emphasize here is that if students are in this triggered, agitated, accelerated, or peak or de-escalation point, their brains are not really ready to receive new information. They're not able to reflect. They are triggered. And so we often, when we get the students who are sent out of class, they're either at that peak or maybe moving towards de-escalation. So we want to do things to really support them in that process and acknowledge that, yeah, asking them to problem solve at that point is not going to be effective. So here's another example showing kind of the difference of our brains. When our brains, and again, we don't need to be a brain scientist to look at these two images and see a huge difference there. Something just food for thought as we're doing this work, understanding how our brains work, and both as humans and as educators, that we want to make sure we are in a point where we have set students up for success to sort of begin to problem solve and talk about the behaviors they're seeing. So here's the remarkable thing about the human brain, is that it has the ability to heal damage, right? So how do we do this? Well, it's through human interactions. So we've got things like endorphins, which are our calm hormones. Those come from PE, recess, playing outside, just having fun, right? We've got oxytocin, that love hormone. That one's my favorite. Okay, so hugs, greetings, checking in with people, all those things that make us feel good. There's actually hormones that are released in our brain when those things happen and can really heal some of the damage. We've got dopamine. Those are things that come out when someone acknowledges you for doing something well, celebrating their hard work, and even eating good food can release dopamine. So if your kids are hungry, kids aren't hearing that they're doing well, then this is an opportunity to just shower them with positivity and sincere acknowledgments for things that they're doing. And then finally, serotonin. That's that kind of willpower hormone, right? When there's dynamic and fun instruction where students are engaged, successful, and the classroom in general just puts them in a good mood. They want to work hard. They kind of see that there's a recognition and sort of something driving them. All right, so that's kind of our introduction into sort of why we do this work, really looking at obviously the data and some of those harmful impacts of exclusionary practices, as well as what we can do to mitigate that, right? Things that are those sort of protective things. And ways that we can use brain research and really think about what are those positive and happy hormones. But of course, it's a PBIS conference, so we've got to throw at least one triangle up here. So we want to talk about what we call, and I'm going to introduce now ISSA, which is the work we've been working on for the past several years. But really, PBIS, that green zone, those universal systems, those are all the preventative things going on in your school, right? Those are, hopefully if you're here, you've got a team guiding that work or starting to develop a team to guide that work. And when we look at this, we're calling our ISSA work Tier 1+, meaning that there are components of it that are available for all students. We're going to talk about some relationship building routine, preventative classroom practices that we would think would be in place across the board in all classrooms. Then there are some out-of-class supports, things that go on when a student's behavior is escalated to the point that they need one-on-one support from an adult outside of the classroom, and that's still available for any kid at any time, but it's obviously not something that all students probably will need to access. And then, of course, we relate this in and we really fold it into what comes next, right? A lot of times as we collect data around some of the support students receive for being sent out of class, that can inform opportunities for kids that might need additional Tier 2 supports, right? Specialized things for groups, and then even going all the way up to that individualized and intensive supports. One thing to remember that we hear too frequently is the labeling of students, right? Oh, it's a Tier 2 student or a red zone kiddo or something like that. And so just a friendly reminder that we really emphasize these tiers about the things, the practices and systems that we as the adults and educators do to support those kids. What supports do they need at that level, rather than what, labeling the student into what zone they're in, right? Because as often it is the case, it's the whole child. They may have an individualized need in their math instruction, but when it comes to playing basketball, they got it covered. They don't need additional supports. They could teach the other kids, right? And so we want to think about them as the whole child. All right. So ISSA stands for the Inclusive Skill Building Learning Approach. And so those words were really carefully chosen because we're moving away from excluding kids and those exclusionary discipline practices. So what do we want? We want it to be inclusive. We want it to really focus on skill building and learning, right? So behavior is communication, and we're going to use that communication to say, what do they need, and really talk about that. So here's some of the goals for that. It's really improving some behavior supports for students, supporting skill development for students and staff, improving student-teacher relationships, and helping create some systems and practices that school-wide can be universally used to support that. And then ultimately reducing the use of exclusionary discipline and the amount of missed instructional time. One thing I was thinking about with those millions of days that Dr. Jameson talked about this morning was that there's also a lot of minutes that add up. So that data gets reported in terms of you missed a half or a full day of school for being suspended. But one thing we're collecting data on are the minutes students miss when they're sent to the office, to the in-school suspension room, to some other location during class or during the school day. So there's, I think that number is even bigger than we'd like it to be, and often gets reported. All right, so here's what we're going to talk about today, and Saki's going to help us move through the next part, which is the preventative classroom practices. But this is our graphic to really show what this work is all about. And at the bottom here, we've got our ISSA team guiding implementation. The work we do, we generally work with that team once a month. And like I said at the beginning, in case you joined while we were still talking, usually this team is an existing team in the building. We're very cognizant of not trying to create additional work, but rather layer this into things that are already being done. So it's usually the Tier 1 PBIS team, maybe there's some schools call it their climate team, other groups that are already interested in supporting students, supporting teachers, and looking at behavior. So the four kind of steps here, it starts with prevention. Everything starts in our classrooms. That's where students are and should spend the vast majority of their time. And so we really want to bolster some of the classroom practices that research and evidence has shown really make the biggest bang for your buck. Then we move into some in-class effective responses to behavior. So what are some things we can all do in our building to support students when there are unwanted behaviors that come up? It's going to happen. And so we want to kind of be ready to say, what can we do to mitigate that? That includes also some break systems. And I know with the pandemic and looking at coming back into buildings, we're all kind of rusty at being around other people. And so having times where people can take breaks, stretch breaks, brain breaks, those kinds of things can really be really useful. And then we move into the out of class ISSA support. So what that looks like when a student is sent out of class. And then finally, the final step is the resolution, that reconnection, really that restorative process. And are there additional supports that student needs? Do they need to be referred to a Tier 2 team or some other group? So how are we doing, Laurel? Any questions that have come up, or are folks doing okay out there in the world?
There was one question that I believe you're going to address later, but it was, how do we break the cycle of classroom disruption?
Yeah, let's save that question, because when we get to this, the in-class effective responses to behavior, I think we're gonna do a little activity that might talk about that. And if not, we can certainly address it at the end. So thank you. All right, with that said, I'm gonna turn it over to Saki.
Thanks so much, Danielle. So as Danielle introduced this graphic to you, let's look into what are the practices or strategies that we can use as educators in the classrooms to prevent unwanted behavior and to promote positive behavior and create a positive environment in the classrooms. So if you could go to the next slide, Danielle. We usually say in our work that it's mainly about, the secret is about changing the adult behavior rather than changing the student behavior. So what are some things that we as educators can do so that our students are promoted in a positive environment? Next slide, please. So these are some evidence-based strategies that we have collated for educators. We came up with the acronym for these strategies as WOW, and we defined them as, the first W stands for welcoming students at the door, O stands for owning your environment, and the last W is for wrapping up the class with intention. Let's see each element in detail, and I'm going to talk more about how to implement these strategies in the classroom. So welcoming students at the door. At the door literally means as you begin. So how to do this? Stand at the door of the classroom. Maintain eye contact with each student as they enter the classroom, give a friendly greeting and ask how their day is going. This is such a simple strategy, and it has proven by research to be such effective strategy to set a positive tone. It promotes sense of belonging. It helps in building trust between the teacher and the students. And my favorite one is this one because it needs no cost. and it needs no preparation at all. Research says that if you follow this strategy, the engagement increases by 20% and disruptive behavior decreases by 9%. So that's something that we can do very quickly, and it takes hardly any time to do this. Next slide, please, Daniel. So if you just go through the internet, there are different ways in which, you know, teachers have been welcoming students in their classrooms. And now with COVID, with all the social distancing norms, how this can be done is like, there are a lot of examples through the internet if you comb through it. My favorite ones are maybe giving a fist bump, or that was pre-COVID, but like maybe an elbow bump now, or maybe saying a simple namaste, or just saying like a air high five, something like that. So think about how this can be done now when we are, you know, re-entering the buildings, and how this can be done in socially distanced format. Next slide, please, Danielle. The next element I'm going to talk about is owning your classroom. It has 3 sub-elements to it: teaching, modeling, and acknowledging. So think about your whole school day, or think about your whole classroom period. What are some of the times and what are some of the things that you feel the need to build routines around? Think about those times, build routines around them. Teach those routines to your students very explicitly, model it for them. Like my favorite one was when I was teaching, assume nothing, like assume your students know nothing about the routine that you're going to tell them, and model it explicitly for them. Teach the routine to them. And when you see students following that routine, acknowledge the positive behaviors so that more and more students are encouraged to follow the routine. So these are some of the examples of, you know, like what are the times or what are the situations I want to build routines around in my classroom. Say, what is my policy about cell phones? What do I want to do my students to do when they are turning in assignments, when they want to sharpen their pencils? Think about all those times, assume nothing, teach all the routines to those to your students, model it explicitly for them. And when you see them, like when you see the expected behavior, positive behavior, acknowledge it positively. So these are all the times when you set up students for success. The last element is wrapping up class with intention. Building a routine around wrapping up class with intention and following it consistently has shown incredible results. It helps in building relationships, creating a sense of community in the classroom. It also helps teacher to assess learning and whether the learning outcomes are met, and it facilitates the equity of voices. There are different ways as to how this can be done, and I want to show this video quickly to understand how this can be done at the end of the class. Daniel, if you could just play the video. I can't hear the voice of the video. I'm not sure if everybody's. Is it?
That's my bad. I had muted myself while you were talking, which meant I muted my video as well.
Oh, thank you so much.
Appreciation, apology, or aha. The closing circle activity was called the 3 A's: appreciation, apologies, and ahas. So the whole purpose is just to have some space to reflect on our day. All I want you to do is to stand around the room somewhere in a circle while we do our brief shout out. People can either identify an appreciation they have, an apology they have, or an aha moment where it's like a light bulb moment in their head. My aha was that race is not the only part of our identity. So can we get a few people to shout out an appreciation, apology, or aha?
I want to appreciate Jonathan. He helped me kind of figure out where I wanted to go with my personal statement.
I think those types of appreciations or community recognitions can go a long way to build the bonds. That's the whole point, right? Building community.
I apologize for having my headphones in half of the time to everyone.
Thanks a lot for that, Carlos. That means a lot.
You might be already doing such routines in your classroom. Think about whether that routine is fostering social emotional learning for your students. Think about what is your style, think about what is your student's style, and then try to have a merge between both the styles and have a routine that's like easy to follow for the students. As you go through the academic year, the routine will become a second nature for you and your students, which can be quickly followed, like say in a 2 to 5 minutes window at the end of the class. And that I turn it into Daniel to take us through the in-class effective responses to behavior.
Great, thanks, Saki. And thanks also, I'm going to give a shout out to Edutopia. If you're not familiar with that website, we're huge fans of them. They are a great resource that takes a lot of research and really packages it in ways that make it really easy for educators to get some information. So we've used lots of their videos, and they have some great examples on welcoming students at the door as well. All right, so once we've got those preventative classroom practices, those WOW strategies, welcoming kids at the door, really owning your environment and being proactive about teaching and establishing routines, acknowledging kids, and wrapping up in a way that's predictable every day for kids, we really move into the next piece, which is in-class effective responses to behavior, right? So we know that even with those great practices, I taught middle school for many years, and I know that these kids are still going to give us lots of teachable moments, lots of opportunities to respond, and we want to be kind of ready to do that. And the more we can support all teachers in the building with some strategies is where we really think can be useful. So here are some behaviors that we in our research have from some of the schools we've worked with, and probably some schools out there that I'm guessing you'd be giving me a nod or shaking your head to say that these might be things you see in your building, right? We work with middle school students, and one of the main reasons we've done that for this grant and this work is that that's where exclusionary discipline rates are at the highest. Oftentimes by the time students get to high school, we see that drop as too many students leave, too many students are dropping out, and so that we kind of lose some of that information. So middle schools is where we really feel like we can have the biggest impact, but of course this work's applicable across all grade levels. And as are these behaviors, I would guess. So look at these behaviors. Here's a few that we've seen from our data, and these were ones that students were actually removed from class from. But I just want you to think about, one of the things we talk about are the antecedents, the behavior, and the consequence. And I don't have time today to really go into a ton of detail on that, but I know there are sessions that can give you a lot more information. But we really talk to have that part of the PD and training that goes into this work with all schools and all staff members is what might be the motivation. So if we think about the why, what the kid might be trying to communicate, what's the reason for this behavior, that can help us more successfully address what we should do next, what we can support them in making different choices and that kind of thing. So take a minute with these behaviors, and maybe we'll just focus on that first one with taking off their hood. Right, so a lot of schools have a policy, no hats or hoods on during class or while you're in the building. So what might be the motivation behind that? Why might a kid leave their hood on, even if you've already asked them or they know the rules? Laurel, what are we seeing out there? I feel like you're my reporter on the streets. I
see a lot of answers about haircuts. Maybe they didn't take a shower. They're cold. Might be a coping strategy, or they're an avoidance strategy. Tired. Maybe they're uncomfortable.
Great answers. I love that people are really thinking about what's that student doing, right? Seeing them as a person. This is a common one we see. It might be cold, right? It's fall, at least for us in the Pacific Northwest here. It's pretty cold out. So yeah, having your hood up can keep you warm. Here's some other examples as we've done this activity. Some of the same things you've said, right? They might be trying to hide something. They might be feeling self-conscious about their hygiene and maybe haven't showered. Maybe they got a bad haircut, all those things, right? Maybe they just like the hoodie because it's cool and it's the skateboarding brand they like, and that's cool to them, right? So thinking about the motivation. So great to this has been a really good exercise to do with staff in schools and get that conversation going. Another one, we see student was side talking when teacher was talking. Maybe they needed to borrow materials. So sometimes we're giving them the benefit of the doubt, not assuming they did something wrong, but trying to assume positive intent. This one's always gets a laugh. And I know our science teachers out there probably get this one, right? They're discussing organisms in class. Real example, a student was removed from class for this because they said a word that was not organisms. So maybe they just didn't know how to pronounce it, right? Or maybe they were trying to be funny. We don't know, right? So something to think about. So we want to shift our thinking and move into what are effective responses to unwanted behavior. So here's some of the kind of key components of an effective response. One, that it's calm and respectful, right? So when our students are starting to escalate and get angry, we want to de-escalate them. We want to try to act as calm as we can, even if underneath we're kind of paddling like a duck and really working as hard as we can. We want to sort of have that, you know, be that adult for them, be that calm kind of support in their world. And like I said, assuming positive intent. Sometimes, especially with some of our students that we know well, it's easy to assume, oh, we know this kid and this is probably consistent with other behaviors they've had, but giving them the benefit of the doubt and assuming it might be a positive thing and not just to annoy the teacher is worth doing. We want to be discreet. I often say my boss is Rhonda, and you know, if she were to be upset with me, if I had done something wrong at work, was late to a meeting, didn't meet a deadline, whatever, I've never had her reprimand me in front of my team, in front of colleagues, that kind of thing, right? As adults, we'd expect that. We're professional and that we would have that conversation privately. And we want to do that same with our students. We owe it to them to be able to have, you know, sort of praise can be public, but correction should be done discreetly and privately. Again, considering the why, the function of that behavior, focusing on building skills, and really thinking about how to match our response to the level of severity. And we'll look at an example of that in a minute here too. All right, so let's go back to our behaviors, right? We've got that student who refused to take off his hood. We think maybe he was cold, right? Like that is a good guess. And so some ineffective responses for all of these would be sending the kid out, right? Sending him to sit in the hallway, to that ISS room, something like that. And so what we want to do is think about what could be an effective response, something that is more discreet, instructional, and focusing on skill building. So take a minute. Let's go back to that one with the student refusing to take off his hood. And what might an effective response be instead of sending the student to the office? So go ahead and type that in the chat. What could you do instead? What do we see in Laurel? Any ideas out there from our brilliant educators?
Yeah, so some people are saying you could write the student a note to ask why they have their hood on, ask if they're cold, have a private discussion in the hall, maybe ask them later. Someone also mentioned that it's harder now to have private conversations with trying to social distance and COVID.
Mm-hmm. It's a good consideration. I love all those answers. Thank you so much. So we say the same thing, privately talk to them about ways to keep warm and still follow the dress code, right? Like that's been often the kind of go-to response. I've updated this though, as we're coming back into our buildings in 2021. And I'm going to suggest that maybe we also can rethink some of our dress codes that often sort of criminalize some behaviors that might also disproportionately affect certain groups of students, right? So something to think about, could we move away and maybe wearing your hood is not a big deal, like maybe that's okay. And we're going to focus on that they're here, they're in their seat, they're learning, and they made it to school today. So just a little something to think about there. Some other behaviors, right? Here's an example when a student was side talking, maybe discreetly talking to that student about lowering their voice and seeing if they need help finding some materials. For this one, right? Laugh it off. Maybe, you know, sometimes you're going to have some funny things, and the more it's often our reaction that dictates how the students are going to react. And so if we can find times to just find the humor in that, and that, yeah, we mispronounce things, and let's learn the right way here, right? And just move forward. All right. So one of the reasons we look at this is we know too frequently in the front office at our schools across the country, this is what it looks like, right? We've got two kids sitting outside to wait to talk to the principal, and maybe a real range of the behaviors or the reason they're sent out. And oftentimes that's due to the nature of a staff's tolerance and what is considered what we'd say a big deal. We really work with schools and encourage you to think about we know that there's such harmful outcomes for removing students from the instructional learning environment. And so to think about, we really want to reserve that for things that truly are big deals. We would argue that dress code violations and, minor disruptions are pretty small deals, and we want to equip our teachers with ways they can respond and get support. So we've used this. This is nothing fancy, but it's a great way to have those conversations with staff in terms of deciding what in your building would be considered a pretty low level behavior all the way to that catastrophic level, right? And so one way we've done this is an example from a middle school we've worked with. This is a principal, his name's Jeff Fuller. He's been an absolute incredible person to work with. And we've learned, I think, as much from him as he's learned from us as in our partnership. But this is what it looked like at their middle school. So he had folks sitting in their grade level teams. He went into his Swiss and printed out a bunch of behaviors that had happened throughout the course of that school year, and teams would divide those up and rank them and then come up and put them on that big deal meter. What was interesting here was that it was part of an ongoing conversation. It's not a one and done, oh, we talked about that once in September and now it goes away, but they can revisit it as they go and keep that visual up in the staff room or someplace that people can really reflect on. But the point is to say, if we want to be able to support kids the way we need to in the office, we can only do that if there's a manageable number of students coming to us. If we have so many and we think everything's a big deal and everything needs an administrator, then that's not going to be a functional system. All right. So a little bit to think about there with those effective responses, and really what are moving away from sending students out for low-level behaviors and really reserving those for big deals. So I'll turn it over to Saki, and she's going to talk about another effective thing we can do in our classrooms.
So class-wide breaks, we might already be in practice of doing it. Like in between two activities, we usually as educators, we say that maybe stand up, stretch your arms, or, like have a round of the classroom quickly. So we are already in process of doing class-wide breaks, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about how can we normalize breaks and how can we use breaks as a school building, and what can we do to bring everyone together so that in every classroom of the building we have similar break system. If you could go to the next slide, please, Daniel. So it's important to use breaks as a preventative strategy rather than a punitive strategy. And it is also important to communicate it to students that breaks are good. They help us, they help us come back to work refreshed and more focused. And it's not a punitive thing to take a break. Breaks teach our students the important skill of de-escalation, and it's also important opportunity for the teacher and the student to come together, reconnect, recalibrate, and start all over again. It helps teachers to identify students who might need more extra supports, and it really helps in understanding and reserving those out-of-class ISSA supports for students who truly need individual skill building and reconnection practices. So what can we do to implement a school-wide break system in our classrooms? If you could go to the next slide, please, Daniel. Sorry, I meant the previous slide. What can we do to build an effective class-wide break system? It's important to have a space where students can take a break in the classroom. If your classroom have available space, use that, or think about budding up with another classroom where your students can go and take a breather. Teach your students how to let you know that they need a break right now. Think about subtle hand movement or a break pass, which will not interrupt the flow of the instruction, but will still let you know that the student needs a moment. Teach the students what they can do to take a breather during the break time. Think about classroom appropriate options such as stretching, doodling, coloring. Also, think about what should be the time for a break. Classroom breaks are meant to be kept short so that students can re-engage back into the instruction easily. and keep the break time consistent for all students. Think about it as another routine that you want to teach students, model it to students, and maybe acknowledge the positive behavior. Also, when students come back, think about talking with the student quickly, whether they are doing okay, check in quickly whether they are doing okay. And if you feel the need, set up a time to check in with the student later. So that's about the classroom break systems. And I turn over to Danielle to talk about out of class ISLA supports.
Great, thank you so much, Saki. We've had some great success with this fall in particular. A lot of the schools we are working with focusing on having breaks that are class-wide so that the whole class enjoys that, to individual breaks for kids that need it. So love that. So now we're going to move into those out of class supports, right? So a lot of schools we work with have some kind of room, and we've got some interesting names that schools come up with those. Sometimes they can be really positive and sometimes they can be not so positive. But when the behavior has escalated, when a teacher has used all of these effective responses and preventative practices, there's going to be opportunities for that student to need additional supports. And so wanted to have some reminders here for best practices, right? Again, we're being discreet. We're modeling what respect looks like. We're keeping our class going. It shouldn't stop all of class if we can. Keep that flow of instruction going while we discreetly do that. Now, again, that's best practice. That's the gold standard. I've been in middle school classrooms. I know that that's not always the case. Sometimes a student is going to demand that they get everyone's attention, and you're going to respond to that. But these are kind of the key considerations there. So one thing we also know is too often when students come to the office and are working with that administrator or behavior support specialist, their answer to why are you here or what happened is, I don't know, the teacher hates me, right? And so we always remind teachers to be as explicit as they can with when they're sending the kid out. So if you get to a point where you're out in the doorway, kind of with the hallway, and say, I'm giving you this pass, here's the you're going to go to the take a break room or the reset room or whatever it's called in your building. And this is because you were so disruptive and used the F word 4 times in my class directed at students. And that's really inappropriate. And we just can't have that happening. So let's go. You can work with, Miss Triplet in the office and then come back when you're ready. Like having that conversation. I think if we can do that and really be explicit about that with the kids so that they have an understanding of your point of view is really best practice there. When they get to that room, we want to remind folks, and we get questions a lot about what is this room what should be in this room. So here's some considerations. One is that language matters. We were working with a school in the South, and their room was called the control room. And we argued that probably doesn't sound super positive and welcoming and in a space that kids want to really go to and think a lot of learning or instruction is going to happen. And so thinking about if you're inheriting a space that already exists and the name is terrible or it doesn't have a great name, think about what it might be. A local school uses the name Room 180. So it kind of doesn't, it's like the 180, right? You're going to turn the behavior around, but it also is just a number. So it doesn't have this like negative stigma with it. So I thought that was a clever example, right? So thinking about what that looks like and how you might be able to rebrand it if it does have a negative kind of connotation, right? Another thing is signage, like what's in that space, right? What are materials that you want? What are messages you want to send to students? Are there fidget toys or things they can do to de-escalate? A lot of schools are even putting that escalation cycle up and having kids, hey, where are you on this right now? Great, it's helping normalize that and have that conversation. Physical setup should be one that allows for face-to-face conversations, allows for some level of privacy. I was at a school just yesterday here in the Eugene Springfield area, and they're using now the room they had for this is now a quarantine room. So now the person doing this work is in the library, which has some real benefits because there's a lot of cozy spots to sit in the library. It's a comfortable space, and there's plenty of room if there was other students in there to go and have a private conversation. So some considerations there. All right. So now we're going to really dive in the last part here about what is the ISSA process. So once we've done all these things, this is kind of those last couple steps on our model, which is all about supporting kids individually. So first step is asking, is the behavior a safety concern, right? In general, so a lot of schools we work with might have a support staff member who can do some of this work, and maybe administrators as well. And a lot of times they might differentiate that by it being something that's a big safety concern or a really big deal to something else that who's going to be able to do this process, right? And so the ISSA process is really all about these things. It's really taking that instructional approach and providing instructional supports instead of those exclusions, like that whole model of, oh, you're going to sit for 30 minutes and somehow think about what you did by yourself, has no instructional components. So the things we do is a debrief, skills coaching, re-entry plan, and some transition support. So let's go through and look at what those look like. So here's the debrief. These are the questions we have encouraged staff to use. Of course, we want folks to put these in their own words, and maybe there's even an order that feels more natural or a flow that works better for them. But in general, the person doing this would be empathetic, right? Would be a real neutral party and not one trying to take sides or do that, but really giving the student the space to tell their side of the story, to tell what happened, what was going on for them, what else was happening in class, right? And trying to also sort of try to dig in a little bit and understand the function of the behavior, the why they did that, right? And as we see at the end here, when we look at some of our reconnection cards, we'll see some of those examples come out, and it's really encouraging and great to kind of be able to have that what we say often is teachers don't have 20 minutes as much as they'd love to individually talk about these kind of things with kids and unpack what happened with the behavior. Some adults in the building do. And so when we are able to utilize them in this way, it can really be a good partnership and good collaboration between that person and the teacher in the class. So talking about what the student maybe needed, what's another way we can get that for you? What might the teacher do to help you in these situations? Are there distractions in the classroom or other things we can do to sort of help that kid? All right. The skills coaching is the next step, and it's really about identifying what's the appropriate skill. So some examples might be if a student's using inappropriate language, right? We're going to say, okay, it's a skill, like for all of us, we use bad language or inappropriate things that are not when we're in the classroom, right? When we're on our own, we all have different maybe language or things we might talk about and subjects we talk about, but here at school, here's what we do. And so it really is thinking about how's that a skill to like have that filter or have that knowledge to say, oh, that's, even though we might think that thought, we don't have to verbalize it. So it's just one example. So it's identifying that appropriate skill, teaching it and modeling it. Okay, let's practice. Let's imagine you were going to say that bad word in your head, but what's going to come out of your mouth instead? How can you teach your brain to pause and not say it out loud, right? Let's practice, let's get performance feedback, and let's communicate with staff members what we're going to try differently next time, right? And then we go into the resolution, reconnection, and additional support. So again, like this is that restorative piece where we're looking at reconnecting with the teacher. So the students spent some time out of class. They have been able to tell their side of the story, reconcile that with what the teacher's experience was, talk about what could happen differently next time, what they can do and what they need from the teacher. And so this is really a template we've given schools. As you can see, this is an example where schools sort of personalized it, put their logo on and their name and their expectations. And so this would be something that that gets completed together by that support staff professional and the kid. And so I'll show you a couple examples of ones that have been filled out. This is a real early version, but it said, "Dear teacher, I learned that not to tap my pencil and have my head on my desk. I can make things better by copying the notes on the board. Here's how I'm going to try to prevent this from happening again. Copy the notes on the board and not have my head on the desk and no tapping. In order for me to be successful, the support I need from you is show me how to do this in a way I understand. Something else I want you to know is that I have no clue how to do this type of math," with 5 exclamation points. So this is a kid asking for help. Obviously, whatever behavior is going on, we're realizing that the function was that they don't know how to ask for help. They don't understand the math. They're kind of lost here. And so what helpful information was able to come from this. Here's another example. This one is an example of when we have an adult fill this out. Now that still means it's the student's words, but we can be a note taker for them if that's a way they want to do it, or if they want to type it on the computer. We've had schools during COVID that did this all via electronic, like Google, and we're able to share it that way. So great. This was from a local middle school. Dear teacher, I learned that I should be quiet and respectful. I should sharpen just until it's usable. Be quiet during book club. I can make it better by being more quiet and mindful of other people's learning. Here's how I'm going to try and prevent this from happening again. Next time, I will ask the person next to me to tell me when I'm getting too loud. I might try mechanical pencils. For me to be successful, the support I need from you is to move me up front to the middle. There's a lot of distraction around me. Like, what a great thing, right? To teach a kid how to ask for a seating preference that works better for them. Love it. And we've added some, as you can see, this new iterations of this over time as we've worked with schools. But this kid's telling us something else. They want the teacher to know I'm easily distracted. I used to see an occupational therapist who taught me some strategies, but I forget to do them. Could you say, use your exercises if I'm distracted? Brilliant. Love that. Like, great. How helpful is that to know? And for that kid to be able to say, oh, I remember hearing, this was really helpful. I wish all my teachers could use this. And that really helps them prompt them to do the right thing. So great examples there. So what is this reconnection? It's something we're going to practice with supportive adults with that skills coaching, right? It's something that requires lifelong skill development. It used to have an I'm sorry for at the beginning, and we quickly took that out based on some feedback that folks were saying, this isn't, one, sometimes it's not the kid's fault, and two, it just sets them up for doing an insincere apology if that's kind of not what they're feeling. We say that apologizing and making amends with an adult who's an authority figure is really hard to do. And so we want to give kids the benefit of the doubt, let them know that if when they're reconnecting with that teacher, which is what that last part of that is, they'll go back and read this to the teacher with the support professional with them, and hear from the teacher that they're welcome back into class, right? That it's starting with a clean slate, right? So it's a way to get them to share some sensitive information. And it's a tool that can really improve or has the potential to damage some of these relationships. So how we as the adults respond really matter. What it's not a think sheet. They shouldn't do it by themselves. It's not an apology. It shouldn't require strong writing skills. If that's a barrier, write it for them or let them type it or something like that, right? It's something that we're gonna be coaching them on and doing it with them, right? And it also should take only a minute or two. It's not a long, drawn out conversation going over everything. It's quick and it's a summary. And so when students return to you, if you're the classroom teacher, this is the information we'd give to them along with some kind of examples of what to say, right? So we're going to allow the student to reconnect with us, and we're going to invite them to rejoin the class, even if we have to put on what I call that fake smile of like, great, glad to have you back. And we're still maybe ourselves a little escalated or bothered. We know that students have a right to a free and public education. And if that adult's determined that the student's ready to return to learning, then we're going to be there to just welcome them back and say, great, you got a fresh start and let's move forward. We're on page 64 in our workbook. Go ahead and get started with your group. Something like that. Okay, I got to zip through the next parts because our time has got a little bit longer than we want for the Q&A, but this is some of the preliminary data we have to support ISSA. And this was from several years back. We'll have some new data as we're working, literally this year's our pilot year with the schools we're working with. But in terms of what we talked about earlier with the minutes of instruction that have been lost for students sent out of class, whether it's with schools we worked with, we saw as a 92 to 93% reduction in the time that students were spent. Oftentimes students were sent to the office and would just sit for quite a long time waiting to see an administrator or a support person. And again, if there are so many customers sitting there waiting to be helped, then the time gets even longer, right? That wait time increases. So by doing some of these proactive and effective classroom universal practices, we're hoping to really move the dial here. So real quickly, our ISSA grant, we're in our 4th year. We've had to pivot like all of us for our pilot study. And so that's where we are now is year 4, but it's been a real iterative process. And we're incredibly grateful to the research partner schools in Oregon that have supported this work. These were the slides that our partners who aren't able to be here were going to share. But we really were able to work with them as we refined this intervention, rolled this out through some of their monthly ISSA and team meetings, and really giving them using both staff meetings and grade level team meetings to have these conversations, because as you know, systems change is a long process. It takes time and it takes ongoing conversations and meeting people where they are and knowing that we're all kind of moving forward in this work. One of the things that was really effective at the middle school we worked with at Arts and Technology Academy was some people identified what they called some clunks, some sort of problems that they wanted to solve. And so here's some examples of some of those problems. Like one was time and process for how to reconnect with teachers. Like, it sounds great, let's go reconnect, but oftentimes you get there and the teacher's in the middle of instruction or doing something with small groups and can't step out even for a minute or two. And so we looked at what grade level teams could identify how they wanted to problem solve that, what would work for them. Another clunk that was identified was students are owning their part, right? That some students aren't really taking ownership of that. And so adding that in, making sure that the people having those conversations can coach students to consider various points of view and their perspective, reminding staff about the purpose of the reconnection, that kind of thing. Another one is getting the information to the office so the debrief is accurate and effective, right? We don't want, teachers don't have time to write a full page of what happened in class. They may only write a word or a sentence at most. And so sometimes that doesn't align with what the student side of things are. And so tightening that process up was something that was an action taken by the team guiding this work. And what's next in the Eugene 4J district is that we're really working very closely with their leadership and behavior folks to continue supporting schools, integrating this into some of the district-wide professional development. Actually, later this week, we're meeting with the behavior support specialists at all the middle schools so they can have some collaboration and discussion and continued PD time there. So there we go. How are we doing on time? I'm looking at it. We got 9 minutes. That's not too bad for Q&A. And I'm going to end it with this quote that really resonates with our team, that the sort of too often we forget that discipline really means to teach, not to punish. A disciple is a student, not a recipient of behavioral consequences. So kudos to Dr. Dan Siegel for that incredible work. So Laurel, how do we want to do questions here? Are there, this is our first session of the day, so not quite sure if folks want to write questions in and you can read those out to us.
Yeah, there are a bunch of questions in here already. So going back a little bit, people are wondering who's responsible for this resource room or whatever the school is going to name that room. And issues with staffing. So someone said that their school doesn't have an assistant principal or there are staffing issues right now. How can they kind of set up this room for their students with these issues going on?
Great questions. Yes, staffing across the board. I know here locally, I have a daughter who's in 3rd grade and it's tight. Again, why our 2 exemplars couldn't even be here because they're out there helping with staffing. So in terms of if you're starting a room, and some of the schools we worked with have started from scratch, they didn't have a room like this to do. And so I think looking at one where in the building is a place that has the space for it and is accessible and feels somewhat positive and inviting for kids would be my first recommendation there. I think getting creative with staffing is what we're all having to do, and knowing that maybe it might be training multiple people, right? Having backup people, having other folks, that it's not just, it's just Danielle, and when she's gone, the whole thing falls apart. Like making sure it's a team approach. The same way I think that staff are having to wear many hats and fill different roles in the school. Saki, if you have anything to add, please jump on in too.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I was about to say that, it's not having a dependency on someone, on one particular person, rather than having it a team approach is really the great way to go about it.
Yeah, there's questions too about how can we use this process in elementary schools?
Exactly which process?
Just the ISSA process in general.
That's a great question. And I would like to say that, maybe keeping the crux of the process similar, like following the questions really with respect to the debrief, student debrief. But then I also understand that, when it comes to elementary, the student might not be able to articulate things a lot, or maybe write it down by themselves. So really helping students to dig in and helping students to articulate, facilitate, and give adult support. At the same time, maybe when you're filling up the reconnection card, the adult takes over the responsibility of what was the conversation, and filling up the reconnection card is really the way to go. And as a former elementary and middle school teacher, what really helped me is giving a lot of positive reinforcement, and which really helped me in creating a positive environment in my classroom and promoting expected behavior. So a lot of positive reinforcement coupled with a lot of adult support is really the way to go. That's what I think. In my opinion, Daniel, feel free to add what you think.
That's perfect, Saki. I love that. I was just going to say that at a middle school I was meeting with last week, we were talking about the WOW strategies and trying to really boost up welcoming students at the door. And I think something that's applicable across all school levels is having not just the teachers do that, but all staff in the building. And as we're short-staffed, having the more presence in the hallways, administrators, secretaries, classified staff who can be there to welcome kids into the building, into different locations, in the hallways, that kind of thing. And so helping our teachers who are feeling, I think, pretty stressed and overwhelmed these days, by modeling that and being a presence for them can be supportive. But I love what you said about the elementary. I think that's perfect. What else,
Actually,
Laurel?
a lot of questions in here.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Great.
And folks can email us. We'd love to chat more.
Yeah, we can send
Here's
follow-up stuff too, because people are asking for resources and things like that as well. Here's a really good one. If a student is already in the room working with the staff that's present when another student arrives, what do you recommend the waiting student do?
Great question. So this happens a lot, right? We've got a couple customers, as I call them, in that room. And so setting up a system where you've got kind of whether it's a welcoming routine where there's some sign at the door, hey, welcome to room 180. Here's the first 2 things to do. Maybe grab a fidget, maybe, sign yourself in if that's the process, thinking about what you can do to set that up so it's a systematic thing. But it's also not a place that hopefully kids come to regularly like they would if it's my language arts class and they know the routine because they're there every day. It's something that needs to be kind of flexible and enough for kids that probably might only visit once like in the whole year. So having some kind of maybe that escalation cycle, maybe something to kind of identify where you are right now, and some kind of calming activity that just lets them sort of de-escalate, chill, and know that, hey, I'll be right with you. And I think if an adult, if I were in there and working with Saki, let's say, and Laurel came in, I might say, oh, hey, welcome, come on in, sign in and have a seat and I'll talk to you in a moment, and just modeling that. Sometimes that doesn't happen though. Sometimes we've seen kids who are super escalated and we're going to need some additional supports and really do the best we can in those situations.
Here's one that we've seen a lot in the schools we've worked with. How do we help classroom teachers find the time management to do the recognition or the reconnection?
Yeah, thanks, Laurel. And Laurel's a perfect content facilitator here because she's been with us doing this work and been in lots of the schools, and that's certainly an issue that comes up. I think talking to staff about that and helping everyone understand the rationale for this, why it's important to reconnect, right? Why it's important for any of us. If we've had an argument with a loved one or spouse or someone, right? Like sometimes it's good to have that cooling off period and then come back together and be able to say your piece. And so schools get creative with how that works. Again, the gold standard is we bring the kid back and the teacher can just step right out and reconnect in the minute, and that's great. That's not the reality a lot of times. Some schools have implemented a take-two strategy. So it could be a universal thing that's taught across the whole middle school or any school, and say, okay, take two. Anytime there's an interruption, anytime the teacher needs a minute or two, they might say, take two. And that means, okay, turn to your neighbor and say two things that, you know, you're still wondering about in this unit we're doing, or whatever that looks like. There's a prompt that's standard, and then the teacher can go and reconnect. So that's been one that's been done with some success in our buildings. Other times it's just a kind of check-in between the adult and that teacher to say, hey, I've got Danielle, she's coming back now. And then following up, maybe if it's obvious that the teacher is doing a science lab and can't step away from the materials, then to follow up with them at the end of class and say, hey, we still need to have that reconnection. When's a good time to do that? Can we come back during lunch, during your prep, right after school, first thing next morning, something like that? Like, when's the best time to reconnect? Some teachers are okay with getting a phone call. A lot of teachers don't want that interruption. So it's just having those conversations and saying, let's try this. Sometimes we also recommend schools start small. So say, start with just your 6th grade team and try this and work out some of these things, and then scale it up to other grade levels. So you can kind of build that momentum.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What about, let's see, what can we do about frequent flyers in the resource room or the wellness room?
Mm-hmm. Great question.
Daniel, can I take this question?
Please do.
And then you can add. Yeah.
Oh, please do.
I was about to say that it really helps in identifying students who would need extra supports. So if you see frequent flyers, or a student using the reset room, or a lot of the times, really think about what are the extra supports that might be more helpful to the students' well-being, and then recommending the student to those extra supports will be definitely of help. That's something that comes to my mind. And Daniel, please add in more. What do you think?
Great, thanks, Saki. I would say also a lot of if there's a way to keep track of the data for the students who are in that class, whether it's a physical sign-in sheet, a lot of schools we work with have a sort of Excel database that we keep track of that, so we can inform their grade level teams, those tier 2 teams, about who are some of these frequent visitors. Is it a problem across all subject areas? Is it they're consistently sent out from one class, and what can be done about that? Another thing we've talked about is encouraging, if this is something that's seen as a positive, that student has a positive connection with the adult in that room, that what are things they can do to earn time in going and seeing that supportive person, right? So it's kind of flipping that and saying, oh, great, if you do these 4 things today, you can spend the last 10 minutes and go check in with that person. So kind of switching it to a positive is another way. So I know we're at time though. Thank you, everyone. I've got my email up here as well, and I'll put Saki, you might want to put yours in the chat there.
Yes.
While it is research, we can't share all of our materials at this point, although we're getting close, and we'll eventually have a website. So if you want to write to us and request, we can, I've got a list started once this is sort of published, and on a website, I've got a list of people I'm kind of waiting to be able to send that all out to, but there are, in the meantime, some materials we can certainly share, and anything you saw here is yours to use. So thank you. Please fill out, there is a session evaluation, so love to get your feedback on this, and wishing everyone a wonderful day and a great rest of your conference. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.